Hey, here we are. We're out here on the Delaware Bay on a beautiful day. So this is the real Bayside Book Chat, but I've got the real bay behind me, and on our little walk out here, we found one of our favorite shells to find over here, which is called an angel wing. They're very, 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 very little delicate, and they look like angel wings. So like I said, we're over here on the Delaware Bay. I don't have the book with me today, but Pete Dunn's Bayside Summers we've talked about in previous episodes, but we're going to talk about a lot of things that would have been in that book. We're going to talk a lot about the history of the Delaware Bay and the things that you can see. And of course, it's wine night, so I brought my wine with me. And being that I'm out here with books in my hand and my toes in the sand, I thought I would pick out a wine that's got a barefoot on it. So I've got my glass of wine, we got a pile of books and a lot to talk about. And we're going to start off by just talking about what's over here this time of year. We're very lucky to be here today because I have a feeling that in about a week I won't be able to. They start roping off a lot of these beaches when the red knots, and accompanied by other birds too. One of my favorites, the ruddy turnstone, some dunlin, a lot of seagulls come through, and of course the red knot is the bird you hear so much about here along the Delaware Bay, involving their migration route and how dependent upon it they are on the horseshoe crab. The horseshoe crab, which you'll definitely see some shells laying around here, will start coming in and laying their eggs. The population of the horseshoe crab is depleted. They are trapped to be used in biological research. They have a very unique blood that is harvested from them. So that has put a lot of great pressure on the red knot. Not only, of course, the loss of the horseshoe crab eggs, but also encroachment of homes and things. Speaking of birds that migrate, the Arctic tern is one of the birds that may fly past here, but not stay here, because it goes from the Antarctic to the Arctic and then back down. It goes pole to pole. It might be actually the longest migratory bird in the world. This area here, south to Cape May, and then north up to Reed's Beach, and over up to there where you see the trees heading, going around the corner is East Point Lighthouse. You're probably not going to see it. I can see it, but you're not going to see it. You'll see some steam rising. That is from the power plant up in Salem County. If you see a little dot taking off on the horizon, it is not a UFO. That it will be Dover Air Force Base, where the big cargo planes will fly right over our head. We do have a fishing boat out here today, and so hopefully that gave you a nice little panorama. In the summertime, Indians spend a lot of time down here. Change of season, shellfish. So sometimes along here at Beachcombing, you'll find things that you don't find on the Atlantic side, and we have found arrowheads over here. Dennisville, which is up past that nook over in there, the cedar trees of Dennisville, where it was the wood that was used by a lot of shipbuilders in the 1800s to build the oyster schooners that were out here in the Delaware Bay. So Dennisville was a famous path along the trail from Philly to Cape May, but also as a shipbuilding town. Of course, a lot of farming. We've got oyster farmers bringing back oyster beds. In the late 1800s, there was a disease that killed off one of the world's largest oyster fisheries in the world, which used to be here. They are starting to bring that back. So there's a little history of the Delaware Bay. Again, read Pete Dunn's book will give you the whole history of it. And I bought a ton of books along that we can talk about. So we're not going to let this blow away. I'll fold this up. My brother misses my paper crunching and throwing. We'll get back to that someday. I have a sip of wine, and we're going to start on some books. So I don't know if you saw it in the distance there, walking up that way was my youngest daughter Phoebe and my wife Marnie. They're out beachcombing while Parker behind the camera and I are doing our thing. I'm going to start off This pile of books has got everything in it. Like I mentioned before, our store, sure, it's fiction and it's literature and it's history, but one of the themes is being a ship captain's study, and we've got so many different ways in that store to show you books that have something to do with the beach and the bay. And so here is a book called Poems of the Sea, and let's see if I can do this without putting my reading glasses on. We're going to read you a little bit of Robert Frost. The title of this poem is Neither Out Far Nor In Deep. The people along the sand all turn and look one way. They turn their back on the land and they look at the sea all day. As long as it takes to pass, a ship keeps raising its hull. The weather ground like glass reflects a standing goal. The land may vary more, but whenever the truth may be, the water comes ashore and the people look at the sea. They cannot look out far, they cannot look in deep. But when was that ever a bar to any watch they keep? Robert Frost. So a lot of history here in along the Delaware Bay. This is a book called The Shore Ghosts and Other Stories of New Jersey. You cannot come to the beach without the book that I talk about all the time. Last week it was in my garden. This time it's at the beach, but Sibley's Guide to Birds, because you never know what you're going to see. We have several guides to shells. This is an older copy. This is a field guide to shells of the Atlantic Gulf Coast, and sometimes you can use these for reference, but sometimes they just look great decorated in your home on a stand or in your bookshelf. For those that are really into it, this is a field guide to the Atlantic seashore. This is part of Peterson's field guide series. Of course, he started off with birds and expanded it into other nature subjects. So this is a field guide to the Atlantic seashore. This book also would look great on a bookshelf. This is called Ebb and Flow, The Tides of Earth, Air, and Water. And that is the biology of the oceans and the bays. If you're a fisherman, you need to know what you catch down here. This is the Fisherman's Guide to Freshwater and Saltwater Game Fish of North America. For those of you that don't know, the basis of Jaws is based upon a 1916 shark attack series of attacks in New Jersey. There's a lot of debate between whether it was one great white. My theory is different. I think it was different species of sharks over a period of time when an eddy broke off of the Gulf of Mexico and as came closer to New Jersey, which it sometimes does. There were 2 books written about that. I'll get to the other one later. This is the one I've read. This is called Close to Shore, and alternates between the history of the events and how sharks operate. Another book that I've read, and this happens to be actually a collectible first printing. This got Sebastian Junger's career going, of course became the very famous movie The Perfect Storm, which locals down here call the Halloween Storm. It was October 1991, I believe. For those that just want to come and read a beach novel, Kristen Hanna book, nice little shell on the front, Romance at the Beach. Another Peterson field guide, this time specifically on shells. One of the most famous books ever involving the ocean, about Lindbergh's wife and finding solace in beachcombing and Captiva, and Mara Lindbergh's A Gift from the Sea. This is a collectible hardback copy. And up to my north, I am only a seagull's flight away from Reed's Beach. This was a novel written by Brent Lott with a fictional tale with the title of this true, actual Reed's Beach. And if any of you good folks don't know any of the Reed's kids, I do, and they are very nice gentlemen. This is a nature guide called A Naturalist on the Jersey Shore. Our bookstore is loaded with guides like this. On the Run, an angler's journey down the Striper Coast, the eastern seaboard, all about striper fishing. I mentioned Stone Harbor has a local history author. His name is Tim McGrath. He wrote the history of John Barry. You'll know it from Commodore Barry Bridge. He may fall over. This book is called The Wave. As a surfer, I really enjoyed this book. It describes in certain chapters how waves work around the ocean and how they affect shipping and surfing. A phenomenal chapter on Laird Hamilton is in here. Someday coming in the bookstore and I'll tell you about it. It's a not-so story. One of the few surfers I haven't met, actually. Here's 12 Days of Terror, companion book. Not by, well, I shouldn't say a companion book, but it's not by the same author, but about the same story. 12 Days of Terror, about those 1916 New Jersey surf attacks, or shark attacks. This is one, well, it may be actually the most famous book written about shipwrecks of the North Carolina coast. This is David Stick's Graveyard of the Atlantic. And you hear a lot of the laughing gulls in the background. This is a book on the ecological history of gulls. And last but not least, this is what I'm going to go do next. After I hang up with you, we're going to go see if we can find some sea glass. So it's a nice sunny day here in the Delaware Bay. We're going to go beachcombing, and hopefully someday I will see you on the beach. So we're going to tease next episode a little bit. Episode 6 next week, we're going to talk a little bit about dystopian science fiction. We're going to crisscross the reality of history we talk about here all the time, and sociology and government, and talk about some sci-fi. And these will be some of the books that we're going to talk about. Of course, Slaughterhouse-5, Catch-22, Brave New World, and then Animal House 1984 by Orwell. And then this is a series in TV that people have been talking about. It's a rewrite of history book, The Plot Against America by Philip Roth. And we continue with our PBS, The Great American Read, Top 100 Books by the Readers of America, that was done last year by PBS. And we have done so far up to 30. So we're going to start off this week, number 31, Where the Red Fern Grows. I do not have a copy, but it is the type of dog that my family always had. My father and my mother, we always had red-bone coonhounds. And that was the book was about red-bone coonhounds. The Outsiders, which Parker read. It's S.E. Hilton Parker?
S.E. Hinton.
S.E. Hinton. She may tell you about that sometime, or maybe she'll do a little expose on that. The Da Vinci Code. Interesting story here. You're very familiar with the book in Angels and Demons. In the book collector's world, there's first printings of books, and the first printing was one of those books where it went up to $50 to $100, and now it's back down to 10, 15, or 20, depending upon condition. It had a little bit of a popularity spike there. And in the future edition, we'll spend some time helping you denote what are first printings and first editions. Next up is Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. And one of my favorite TV movies, the Dune series, based upon a book by Frank Herbert. It involves actually a lot about biology in the book that's not covered as much in the movie. So it's known for two things: science fiction, and then also a commentary on ecology. And that's Dune, with the movies coming out later this year. And then there's a whole series of all the paperbacks that were follow-ups done by him, and then I think a son after that. This is a classic called The Little Prince. Then, out in the movies this year, and we talked about it a lot here, Jack London's Call of the Wild. Clan of the Cave Bear. The Hunger Games, and along with that, of course, would be Mockingjay and Catching Fire. And last but not least, we have our trivia, and we hope that you enjoy the trip out to the bay, because a lot of the questions are going to be along the lines of nautical and or the bay. And last week, a lot of the questions were about Mother Earth, as it was Earth Day. And these are the answers for last week's trivia. Keep in mind, you get $25 for the person with the most correct answers. A tie would be the person who got them in first. Week 1 was Lynn Masseri. Week 2, nobody sent any in, so lost opportunity. Week 3 was Lynn Masseri again. Week 4 was my brother Mike. And they've all earned $25 gift certificates to the store. And just by sending in any answers, you get a $5 book credit. And last week's answers were, what is a receding tide? That is an ebb tide. What is the fastest animal in the world? It is a peregrine falcon. The book that Rachel Carson wrote about DDT, Silent Spring. What was the name of the dog in Call of the Wild? His name was Buck. Dr. Seuss's book about saving trees was The Lorax. First Earth Day, 1970. Author of Walk in the Woods was Bill Bryson. The famous French oceanographer, explorer was Jacques Cousteau. The PA state bird is
Ruffed grouse.
And the PA state flower is
the mountain laurel.
My cousin Chris, who's a subscriber to PA Game News. I would imagine you got that right. This week we are doing the nautical stuff. So we're doing, what is the largest fish in the world? That is question 1. Question 2 is, in the back bays, when water is half fresh and half salt, it is called what? What kind of water is that? Another tide question. When the tide is changing, there is a period of time when the tide does not move, and it is said to be blank tide. It is also the name of a local beer brewery. The popular or well-known shorebird that visits the Delaware Bay and really needs the horseshoe eggs to help us in his migration is what? The bird that has probably the longest migratory route of any bird in the world that goes from pole to pole is called a what? And what color blood does a horseshoe crab have? What is the name of the boat in Jules Verne's late 1800s sci-fi book 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea? And speaking of boats, what is the name of the boat that Charles Darwin, the HMS, what is the name of the British ship that he went to the Galapagos Islands in and wrote about origin of species? What is the name of that boat? What Delaware Bay fish is said to bite when the gnats bite and the dogwood blooms? That was question number 9. And the last question is, what is the name of the little clear stone that washes down the Delaware River and shows up on the beaches in Cape May? I half gave you the name there already. They make jewelry out of it. What is its name? And then that is the end of trivia. And then we usually follow it up with a toast. And again, to the mom and pops out there, and then also to frontline people. The Herald newspaper had in spout off the previous week. I sent in a little ditty, which I don't have right in front of me what I said, but the gist of it was that, you know, there's certainly heroes that we know about, and that's the people who chose to be in professions that leads them to be heroes, and that's of course police, fire, EMS, and nurses. But there's another group of people who are heroes too. They didn't choose that career, but in this particular event, they are heroes as well, and that's the people who are at you know, your CVS or your food market, anybody who's helping you out, who just needs to show up for that job, and a lot of them are doing it very proudly and very willingly. So there's a toast to them. And as we often say, you know, keep low, aim high, be smart, be safe, and and shop small. And till next time when we carry volume 6, cheers.